title, The Carnival Worker Who Never Takes Off His Mask. Every traveling carnival that ever was has its own ghost story, its own special bit of October lore. For the Jubilee of Wonders, that legend was a man who wouldn't speak and who never, ever took off his mask. He'd just stand there at the edge of the midway, a silent statue in a faded uniform, with a grin that was painted on for all eternity. We were just kids, of course, full of that foolish summertime bravery that dies in the autumn air. We thought it'd be a grand joke to be the ones who finally saw his face. We never imagined we were about to rip the latch off a cage that grin was meant to keep locked. The Jubilee of Wonders always rolled into our sleepy little town in October, arriving on a tidal wave of garish light and calliope noise that washed over the community field for one weekend only. For most kids, the thrill was in the rickety coaster that felt like it might shake itself to dust, or the impossible ring toss. But for us, for my friends Leo, Ben, and me, the whole carnival was just him. We called him Giggles. Not because you'd ever hear him laugh. He was as silent as a photograph, but because of that mask. It was a pale, moon-white face, polished smooth, with two empty black holes for eyes and a wide, unblinking, cheerful grin. He worked the entrance to the funhouse, a palace of mirrors, holding a small cane and standing still for hours. He seemed less a man and more a piece of unsettling, living decoration. The stories the old folks told were as much a part of the carnival as the caramel apples. Some whispered he was a soldier from a forgotten war, his face ruined beyond repair. Others swore he was the original owner's son. Born so hideous, his own father locked him away behind a permanent smile. Leo, who was always chasing some kind of glory, had a much simpler theory. It's a gimmick, he'd scoff, kicking at the dirt. Just some different sweaty guy under there every year. And on the last night of the carnival, under a sliver of a moon, he announced, "Tonight, we prove it." The plan was born of pure boyhood foolishness. We'd wait for the crowds to melt away, for the carnival to sigh its last breath for the night. Then we'd march right up to Giggles, pull off the mask, snap a picture, and become legends. Ben was nervous, and so was I. There was a feeling around that man, a heavy stillness that felt older and heavier than any cheap carnival trick. The very air around him seemed to carry a special chill. But Leo's confidence was a fire we all wanted to stand by, and the fear of being called chicken was worse than the quiet, needle-prick dread in my stomach. So we waited, crouched behind a half-dismantled cotton candy stand, the cloying smell of burnt sugar hanging thick and sweet. The happy screams of the midway died down, replaced by the groans of tired generators and the lonely clang of metal on metal as the rides came down. The lights winked out one by one, painting the grounds in long, deep shadows. Soon, the only thing lit on the whole field was the leering, colorful mouth of the Palace of Mirrors, where Giggles stood his silent, lonely watch. "Okay," Leo whispered, all sharp angles in the dark. "Let's go." We crept out from our hiding spot, our sneakers crunching on a graveyard of discarded tickets and popcorn. The silence was a living thing. Every step we took was a cannon shot across the empty fairgrounds. Giggles hadn't moved an inch. He just stood there, his masked face tilted down a little, as if lost in some private thought. That painted-on grin seemed to be mocking the very darkness that surrounded it. "Hey, pal," Leo called out, his voice trying to sound brave but cracking right in two. "Show's over. Time to go home, ain't it?" Nothing. Not a twitch. Not a visible puff of breath in the cold. We were only 10 feet from him now, and my heart was a wild drum against my ribs. Up close, the mask was worse. It wasn't cheap plastic. It looked like old, cracked porcelain, webbed with 1,000 tiny fractures you couldn't see from far away. Leo shot us a look, his eyes glittering with a fool's excitement. This was it. He lunged, his hands grabbing for the mask's edge. "All right, enough games. Let's see the real you." The second his fingers touched it, something went wrong. Leo grunted, his feet skidding in the dirt as he pulled. "It's stuck," he gasped, his voice tight. "Help me." Ben, loyal as a hound, moved to help him, but I was frozen stiff. I could see it, clear as day in the dim security light. It wasn't just stuck. Where the mask should have met his neck, there was no line, no seam. The pale, cracked material just blended into his skin. And beneath it, dark, spidery veins pulsed with a slow, black, secret rhythm. Then, for the first time, Giggles moved. It wasn't a sudden push or a fight. He just lifted his head, slowly. The motion was stiff, all wrong, and it came with a faint, dry crackling, like old twigs snapping. He looked right at Leo, and through those two black eye holes, there was an impossible nothingness. Not just shadow, but a void that drank the light. A deep hum started, a note so low you felt it in your bones, vibrating up from the ground itself. The funhouse lights behind him flickered like mad. They pulsed faster and faster, turning the world into a jerky stop-motion nightmare. In one flash of light, he was there. In the next, he was 2 feet closer. He wasn't walking. He was just arriving. The grin on the mask didn't change, but in the strobing chaos, it seemed to stretch, to widen, to become a hungry, awful thing. Pure, animal panic shattered us. We screamed. Leo scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet. Ben just turned and ran, a raw, wordless cry torn from his lungs. I was right behind him. We sprinted, blind, into the maze of dark stalls and skeletal rides. The air went cold, a biting, unnatural chill that had nothing to do with the night. That hum followed us, a constant, bone-jarring thrum that felt like it was coming from inside my own skull. I risked a look back. He was coming. He didn't run, didn't even walk fast. He just drifted, his feet seeming to float over the ground, his body stiff and straight. He moved through the shadows like a ghost, that pale mask a floating beacon of terror in the gloom. We scattered. It was the worst thing we could have done. Ben shot left, toward the giant, dark skeleton of the Ferris wheel. Leo bolted right, for the main gate. I ducked into the first place I saw, the dark, yawning entrance of the Palace of Mirrors. My breath caught in my throat as I plunged into that disorienting hall. The dim emergency lights threw long, warped shadows everywhere. 1,000 terrified versions of me stared back, all pale and wide-eyed. The hum was louder in here, bouncing off the glass. I squeezed myself into a corner, trying to will my ragged breathing into silence. Outside, a scream tore through the night. Ben's scream. It was short, choked off halfway. Then, nothing. A deep, awful silence that was 1,000 times worse than the scream itself. The hum stopped. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying, "Just go away, please, whatever you are, just leave." A soft, dry scraping sound came from the funhouse entrance. My eyes snapped open. He was standing there, his head cocked at that same crooked angle. He didn't seem to be looking for me. He just stood, a statue in a hall of 1,000 reflections. The grinning mask was everywhere, a whole army of smiling devils staring right at me. And then I saw it. In one of the warped mirrors, I could see the back of his head. The porcelain didn't stop. It covered his whole head, seamless, except for a dark, ugly-looking clasp at the base of his skull, like some ancient, rusted brace. The mask wasn't a disguise. It was a prison. And our stupid prank had just started to pick the lock. Leo stumbled into the entrance, his face a mask of pure shock. He was holding a tire iron he must have grabbed from a worker's toolbox. "Get away from her," he yelled, his voice shaking. The thing in the hall turned, its movements slow, as if through water. It drifted toward Leo, desperate, I grabbed a loose sign from the floor and threw it at the nearest mirror. The glass exploded, the sound ripping through the hall. For just a second, the figure paused, its head snapping toward the noise. In that moment, Leo charged, swinging the tire, not at the man, but at the side of his head, at the mask itself. The sound wasn't the clank of metal on porcelain. It was a sickening crack, like old, dry bone giving way. It was deafening. A big, triangular piece of the mask, right by the grin, broke clean off and clattered to the floor. For a long second, nothing happened. The figure stood stock still. Leo froze, the tire iron in his hand, his eyes wide with the horror of what he'd done. And then the real sound began. It wasn't a scream. It was a wave of pressure that pushed out from the hole in the mask, so low and deep it made the other mirrors hum and my teeth ache. A foul smell filled the air, the smell of dust and dry rot, of something that had been sealed away for 1,000 years. Out of the crack in the mask, a thick black vapor began to pour. It wasn't like smoke. It was like liquid darkness, an oily substance that moved with a mind of its own. The grinning mouth, now broken, seemed to stretch into a silent, agonized shriek. The worker's body began to convulse, his arms and legs thrashing wildly. He dropped his cane, his hands flying up to his head as if he could hold the pieces of his prison together. But it was too late. The blackness flooded out of him, gathering in the air. The worker's body just collapsed, an empty suit of clothes hitting the floor, but the darkness kept rising. It was a shapeless, formless shadow, a patch of pure nothing that seemed to eat the light around it. It had no eyes, no face, no limbs, but you could feel it was awake, and it was free. The shadow hung in the air for a moment. Then, not even glancing at us, it drifted right through the wall of the funhouse, as if it were smoke, out into the empty carnival grounds, and toward our sleeping town. Leo stood like a statue, all the color gone from his face. I didn't wait. I grabbed his arm and pulled, and we ran. We didn't look back. We fled the Jubilee of Wonders, the low hum fading in the night behind us. We didn't stop running until the first friendly streetlights of our town were in sight. Of course, no one believed our frantic story. When the police finally drove out to the field an hour later, the carnival was gone. Every last ride, every last stall. They said it was impossible, that a whole carnival couldn't just vanish in an hour. They said we must have dreamed it all. But they found one thing lying in the damp grass where the palace of mirrors should have been. It was a pale, porcelain-like mask. It was missing a single piece, and the painted-on grin seemed wider, somehow more triumphant than we remembered. We never saw the Jubilee of Wonders again. I don't think anyone has. But they say that sometimes, in small, forgotten towns across the country, when the October wind blows just right, people hear a low, unsettling hum in the air. They talk about a sudden, creeping dread that settles over them for no reason at all. A feeling like they're being watched by something they can't see, from a place just beyond the light.